to the Writer's Hive. This is a bi-weekly show where we attempt to demystify the writing and publishing process in the hopes of creating a writer's hive mind. As usual, I have Amber and Julie with me, and today we are talking about the self-publishing experience. I wanted to talk to these ladies who've had experience with self-publishing and any tips and tricks and maybe do's or don'ts when it comes to self-publishing. And I'll also go through my process as well. So I would love to start with Amber.
Well, I have a lot of don'ts. So I actually joined NaNoWriMo in 2011 and I wrote a book. I wouldn't call it a novel because I think I ended it on like 49,000. So it wasn't technically a novel. I did not edit it. I just put it for sale. It was not a good idea. So this was the book. It was a vampire novel and I didn't know anything about formatting. And so there's no formatting. There's no paragraphs. There's like the ugliest font you've ever seen in your life. As it was not good. I did learn over time. So first, don't not edit. So basically do edit your book, get an editor. This is just like one picture and I used the like cover designer thing on like Create Space to create this in it. Not great. So get a cover designer, get an editor, 100%. Do that. Over the years, if you'll see that like I got better. So this one was the second one. Also not a great cover. One picture, used a cover designer. And then I started to learn about Photoshop a little bit. So I got a little bit better of creating 2 images and then the cover designer. Still not great. And then I hired a cover designer. This is basically the second book of this series. And I have a new cover for that one, but I didn't get a copy of it. But at least I did get a cover designer. At the time, this was very on trend, this like 3D art style. Not anymore. And then I actually really learned how to use Photoshop. I took a class, and then I was able to create this for my short story collection, which I'm still really proud of. And this is one that you can actually still get if you wanted to get it. The rest are not available for sale. But so for my do's to make your life easiest, get editors. Get cover designers or learn how to do cover design yourself, like take a class, actually learn it and learn about what internal formatting should look like or hire someone to format your book for you. All of that is like the pre-process, the actual story, the cover, everything. Marketing, I don't know. I can't help with that. I never marketed any of these books ever. I just put them out there just to see what would happen. I did do a few blogging tours because I used to be a blogging person. That's actually how I met Julie. Yeah, it wasn't a great thing for me to do, to not really edit and just kind of put it out there, because there's a lot of errors and mistakes in those. And I don't have any plans of ever redoing them and putting them back out, because it's not the kind of stories that I want to tell anymore. But also I would say if you're unsure about anything, there's always people out there that you can hire to help you with it. So that would be my tip. Just hire someone to help you, no matter which part of the process it is. And don't be me. Don't use your favorite author name on ones that you aren't proud of, because then you can never use it again as like a traditional publishing, or you don't want people to find that with your, like, don't do that.
I never even considered whether or not I should use my own name. It just felt very much like, oh, well, obviously I'm going to use my own name, but then that does become something down the road. If you're looking to traditionally publish, that, you know, can you consider yourself a debut author? Will they be able to find your other novels? Are you still proud of those novels? Once something is in paperback, if you release it in something more than just an ebook, then you can't, you know, ever erase that, right? So like it remains something that is searchable. So that is something to consider. I only have the one book that I self-published, and that is Shoot Down the Wendy Bird. And I will say that I did have a friend who was very good at writing edit this for me. And then I did have another friend that was better with design, helped me with the design of the cover. Amber helped me to redo it eventually with like blurbs and reviews and things like that on the back. But one of the things that I will say I did 100% wrong, because there's not a ton I did great about this. It was a collection of things that I wrote over a multitude of years while I was running an online women's magazine, and I was burnt out. I was writing article upon article and very structured writing, and I wanted a creative outlet, but I didn't have time to write novels. So I was writing these really short flash fiction stories in my free time, just to have like a creative outlet and feel like I was still doing what I wanted to be doing in the writing sphere. So putting them together felt very natural. I will say I took a lot of time to make sure that I kind of curated the order I wanted them to go in, that they had like a flow throughout the book. There was a reason for each piece to make it in there. Not all of them did make it in there. But I will say one thing that hurt me was that I did not do anything in terms of not necessarily marketing, but planning myself through Amazon. I did not look at what this book actually was. I didn't put it into the correct categories on Amazon. I did not have it marketed in the right spheres. This is actually the second cover, because the first one said short stories and poetry. They're not short stories, it's flash fiction. They're very, very short stories. So I had actually even mislabeled what I had published because I didn't know the difference between short stories and flash fiction, which got called out in a couple of reviews. And they're like, these are not short stories. This is flash fiction. And the more I looked into it, I was like, oh, they're 100% right. So when I redid some of the internal formatting as well as, the cover, I fixed that the second time around. I also probably could have genred this as adult as opposed to YA. A lot of the themes and a lot of the things that I discussed were pretty intense, and at the time of publishing it, content warnings weren't really a thing, and I wasn't really as considerate about what may or may not be harmful or triggering to certain people. And there are some darker subjects that are covered in the book that should have come with some kind of content warning. And I had aged down a lot of my things to make them more YA appropriate, because that's where everybody was publishing. And so I made a lot of mistakes with that I feel like I would have redone a different way had I to do it again. But specifically knowing what genre you're publishing in, making sure you have your correct categories when you list it on something like Amazon, that all of your subcategories are correct and so that you're searchable is important. I really didn't do very much with marketing outside of mentioning it when I started BookTube eventually. I did have a social media following already because I already had an online presence with my online company. So I was able to get sales that way. But I also ordered, I think, 500 author copies, which is a little excessive. That was a big budget buster right off the bat to put that money out to get that many copies. I will say I don't have that many left, but I still have probably 50 copies lying around my house, because I thought that the best thing for me to do was to sell them through my own website. And then that way people could get signed copies, they could get personalized copies. But I ended up not really budgeting at all how much I spent on the copies up front, how much I spent on the mailers and the mailing. I didn't know anything at the time about media mail. I didn't know that media mail was a thing and that you could send out books specifically through media mail. So I was paying like a flat shipping postage, and until like a very kind postal worker that I went to like this specific post office all the time to send these out. I was like, you could, like, what are you sending all the time? I'm like, books. And they're like, why are you not sending media mail? You can be saving so much money. So I lost so much money on this book, which I genuinely do. I've never reread it. I wanted to say, like, I genuinely love these short stories and these flash fictions, but I've never looked at it again. I'm sure there's errors in this book, and I don't want to know. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to know. But at the time, they were what I needed creatively. But I also went back into like really, really old notebooks and binders and poems from when I was much, much younger, which don't really necessarily fit me anymore, but I thought might fit the YA market, So I would say be smart financially. I got bookmarks printed. I bought way too many author copies. I thought that shipping them out myself would be the best thing to do. and be more incentive for people to buy because they could get these custom, personalized signed copies. But it was way too much money up front for me to have to be paying. So there was a lot financially that I did wrong. And then in terms of like actual genrering on Amazon, I hurt myself by not even knowing what my book actually was.
Question, do you want to explain what it means when you put a book out physically, why you can't ever take it down?
Yeah, I think Amber might know more about that than I do, because I think she's actually tried to get her books taken down. But I do know that once it's out physically, it becomes a lot harder. Amber, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, so the only experience I have is trying to take it down off of Amazon. I didn't try to take it down off anywhere else because I published directly through like CreateSpace and Amazon. So there's twofold as to the reason why Amazon won't take it down if it's a physical copy. The first reason is that they assume that if they sold physical copies, there's a possibility that someone can want to sell back used copies. And so they would need to have something listed where they can put it underneath that listing for used copies. The second part is the ISBN. So the ISBN, the issue that I did was I went directly through Amazon, used a free ISBN. So now Amazon technically owns the ISBN that I publish these books under. And so I can't make them do anything. It's their ISBN. If they want to list it, they can list it. So that's definitely a tip I would say, is to buy your own ISBN under your own name or your company name if you want to like make yourself like a publisher, because at least there you have some leverage that you can say like, look, this is mine. I want to use it somewhere else and I need you to remove it. And I think that you have more, I don't know for sure if they would. They may still want to have it listed for the reason of having, used copies, but I think you have more leverage to make them take it down. But I have no leverage. It's their ISBN. There could be used copies. And I think actually one of my books does have used copies listed for sale, which is terrifying. But I was like, take it. I almost want to buy them myself just to get them out of the world. But yeah, so forever, no matter what, if you search my author name, Amber Lachelle, that I use, you'll not only find this one that's actually for sale, but you will find all of these that I can't take down that just say out of print and unable to sell. So if I went to a publisher and I wanted to do traditional publishing and I got, if they picked me up and they're like, yeah, we want to publish your book, I couldn't use Amber Lachelle because then some of these stories are not the same kind of stories. Like I want to go in more of a romance, women's fiction space, and this is not obviously that space. And I can't use that name. That was a name I had dreamed of using since I was a kid, and now I can't use it. I screwed myself over because I didn't buy my own ISBNs and I used that name. So that's the reasons that I was given as I was digging deep into trying to get them removed is if it would have been my ISBN, I might have been able to, but I can't.
That's good to know because as I'm doing this for the first time, there are so many nuances of self-publishing. And the reason, and I knew this going into it, I'm coming from a traditional background. And, as the topic of my book suggests, my nonfiction book, is that I wanted more control. I want to take back this book and do whatever I want with it. But being your own publisher is quite a process. And I have found through friends such as Amber and Julie and other self-published friends that having that community is so important because there are so many little nuances of things, as Amber mentioned, not knowing that you can't take a book down once it's in a physical format using ISBNs. There's really not information about that on the internet or easily searched unless you become part of that situation where you're like, hey, I want these books back. So this process for me has been about so much research and the little nuances and asking questions. Also, I published my first book in 2013, and years before that I was trying to get published, and there wasn't a lot of information out there about self-publishing. It was usually just it was more of like that idea that, hey, you can't make it in trad publishing, so let's just do self-publishing, where now it's like such a viable option for authors. So us going into it, I did consider it with my first book, and it's weird that I'm coming back full circle and self-publishing the book now, but I am armed with so many more resources. So if you are at all looking at self-publishing, or the idea of you're not sure where you want to go with your book, there are so many independent and traditionally published authors who are giving all of this information. So you can look at blog posts and business for writers books. There are many, many of them out there. Cultivating a community of indie writers, indie authors. I know, like, at least in the past, there was such a divide between traditionally published authors and indie authors. And to be honest, there still is a little bit. And as I'm moving from trad to indie, I find the indie community is very welcoming, because it's not like I'm selling, a specific television and you only want to stay with that certain brand. Books, you can read thousands of books in your lifetime. So I don't see any other author as a competitor of mine. I think that maybe the business of traditional publishing is sort of creating that divide and saying that, like, we can't play, we can't talk, we can't experience this together, but we are all writers, we're authors, and sharing those experiences is very important moving forward, especially with after coming out of 2020, the trad publishing business is very volatile at this point, which was a deciding factor for me with how I wanted to continue selling my books, because I want to be in control and I want to be able to do whatever I want with my books and also be a part of such an amazing community. So that would be my dues. I don't have a lot of experience with it yet, and I'm going along this process. That's why I'm being a lot more vocal on my channel with my process, and especially with my book that's coming out, because I think that's necessary to succeed as a community of authors, and to not just allow publishers to tell us what to do, and not tell the stories that we want to tell because maybe that's not hot in the next 2 years. That's my experience so far.
Yeah, so when I first published my first one in 2011, self-publishing was very new, and it had just hit the point where there were like 2 self-published authors that had sold millions of copies. So it was just at that beginning boom stage, but there was still so much bad things out there from people like me who just threw it out there and didn't do the work. And so now it is definitely, there's tons of books that I've seen, on Amazon or on Goodreads or anywhere that I'm like, ooh, that looks interesting, and not even realizing that it's self-published or that it's indie published until I get into it. And it's on the same level as traditional publishing, because things have changed, and there is a shift happening where more authors are moving into that indie space. One thing I've noticed in the indie space is reader expectations are different. So when you're a traditionally published author, because of how long that process takes, your readers are usually with having an expectation of 1 book a year, 1 book every 2 years, and that's fine. When you move into the indie space and you start to build up an audience, they expect, because they think you're doing all this yourself, you don't have to wait for all these other people. They expect a closer to 2 to 4 books a year. So as long as you put in the time and the effort, and you know that you can get yourself to a place where you're putting out at least 2 books a year consistently, you can be very successful as an indie published author. And I know so many indie published authors that have been picked up by traditional publishers just because they're consistently, doing well. But as long as you set yourself up for success and you do all the research and you talk to people that have done it and you understand expectations and you understand the amount of work that's going to go in, you would think that it's less work, but it's 10 times more work than traditional publishing. Because whereas with traditional, you are still doing the work, you are still editing the book, you are still doing that, you are working with people that they're sending it off and doing all this and sending it back to you. You don't have to worry about who that is, that's them. You have to do your own research as an indie book publisher. Like, you have to find the right editor for you, because you can have a bad editor. Not that they're bad at editing, but they may not work well for your book. It may be that's not their preferred genre, or your writing style and their editing style just clash. Like, if you're somebody, let's say, that loves M dashes, and you have an editor that's like super Oxford comma, you're not going to mesh well, and vice versa. So just, you have to do that research up front. It's going to take more time. But once you get your team of people, stick with your team of people if it works for you, and then you'll be successful.
I also think that compared to when we self-published, there's a lot more options for self-publishing. There is a lot more out there in terms of ways to get your book out into the market. Ingram Spark did not exist when I was self-publishing. Like it was a create space kind of a situation. I went through Amazon. Was it on Barnes and Noble? Sure. Like hardbacks were not an option. The like paper quality, the cover design, all those kinds of things. I wasn't looking at market standards for covers in my genre. I wasn't looking at the, how to write an effective blurb. I didn't do a lot of the things that self-publishing or hybrid publishing authors would need to do at this point. So my do's and don'ts were dependent upon me at that stage of self-publishing, which is a lot different than it is now. So take time to know your genre, take time to know the market in your genre. I would work as hard as you could to make your book look as trad pub as possible. So know what the covers in that genre look like, know what the back blurb in that genre looks like, the word count in that genre, know reader expectations for the genre that you're publishing in. I was advised to look at reviews for books in my genre and then take those like 1 and 5 star reviews and see what didn't work, like expectations from the readers that were not met, that upset them, verbiage and language that they used in their glowing reviews, and then see if my book had those things. So the things that people really looked for, did my book satisfy all of those things? That's stuff I can do now going forward, but back then definitely had not done. So the amount of work that goes into self-publishing, hybrid publishing, indie publishing, even if you're with a small publisher, the way that I am now, a lot of that still comes down to me knowing, protecting your own rights, protecting your own interests, making sure that you have done the research, like Amber said, for your ISBN, making sure that you have control over those things. If you work with editors, making sure that you have your final proof copies of those things and like all of the drafts along the way, your full files for your cover designs, things like that, so that if you ever want to make changes, those are things that you have control over. It is a lot more control, which is very appealing for a lot of people, but it's also a lot more work. So you need to be aware that that's something that's going to happen. I think unless you're an A-list author with a publisher, even at a top 4, a lot of the marketing comes down to you. So it's still something that you need to work on as an author. Author platform was not something that I did a lot of research or time or investment into. So I sold to my close circle, and then outside of that, I never got sales or growth outside of that initial like first boom, which is why the investment that I put in up front was not necessarily beneficial. So yeah, which is not to discourage anybody from going an indie published route. I think it's phenomenal, but I think that taking your time to get invested in the community, join some groups, learn from other people's mistakes is really super beneficial to keep you from having to deal with the same things, because there's a lot out there to know, and I haven't self-published in quite a while, so there's a lot of other markets now, and the standards have changed, and the industry of self-pub has changed a lot since I put my book out. So there's a lot of information out there for you, though.
And on the flip side of what you said, you may, or some people may think it sounds discouraging, but for someone who has been on the other side, I find it very encouraging to be in control. And while it's very overwhelming and I have pages upon pages of lists of things I need to do for each book, changing your copy on the back of your cover, or even changing your cover, anything that you want to change ever, when you're self-publishing, you can do at any point. I know a lot of self-published authors who would maybe after a couple of years change their covers, or if they write nonfiction, put out a new edition. That will never happen in trad publishing. Anytime that I've requested changes, anything that had to do with more of editing that was missed or formatting, I had to jump through hoops to get that fixed, because once you also put like a paperback out, they'll do print runs. You can't change anything once it's done. Once everything is finalized, that's it, which I don't know why it didn't scare me previously, but maybe because I was more inexperienced. But now I know, okay, I'm going to do the research. I'm going to look at categories and keywords, do the best I can right now. But I know in a year from now, if my ads aren't working or anything like that, I can easily go in and change it and not have to jump through hoops, not have someone tell me no, and do what I want for the rest of the lives of these books. So it's just a different way of thinking. Every book has its own path, and where you are in your publishing experience, you can make that decision. But I think having both sides, all perspectives, is extremely important in that sense.
Yeah, 'cause the market changes. Like, different cover designs are really popular at 2013 that are no longer popular. But if I still believed in that book and if I quit selling it, I could easily go in and get a new cover designer, change the cover to match current standards, and people would think it's a new book that haven't read it yet, and they would buy it, and that would be a way to further sales that you can't do in traditional publishing. And I do like having that control, and especially now, like with Ingram Spark, what they provide as far as getting it onto the Ingram database and getting it out to independent, bookstores, to Barnes and Nobles, to libraries, because libraries won't buy your book unless it's on the Ingram, a database. They just won't. And I would love to have my books in a bookstore, but also in a library. So I love that there's more options. There was not even finding a cover designer took months to find one, just because there wasn't a lot out there that didn't work directly with publishers. And now you can just Google it and find so many websites with like tons of pictures of what covers they've done, and people that follow the trends and know what's trending. And it's just easier. It's still hard, but it's, I think, a little easier now because there's more information out there.
And on top of that too, like in my research of editors and cover designers, I see biographies of these people, their experience, who do work with traditional publishers. Books that I had published, usually later in the copy edit stages, I worked with editors who the publisher hired to do these things. So there's such a wide, like a broader range of people working with self-published authors and indie published authors that it's definitely worth considering. And I know Julie had mentioned previously about expenses. That would be another thing to be cautious of, but it wouldn't necessarily be a deterrent. There's being aware of the costs is important, because I wouldn't recommend buying 500 copies, which is something that actually in my research, a lot of people used to do in self-publishing because they didn't know that they could do what we actually, I don't think, had print on demand as frequently, or at least not available so widely. In terms of the amount of money that you spend up front, it does seem very daunting, because as we've mentioned, we always recommend, getting an editor. Editors are expensive. Cover designers are expensive when, they have a lot of experience. I mean, there's always budget options for everything. And like I said, you can always go back and change stuff. As an author, I was a digital first, digital only author, depending on the books that I had. And, giving up all of that control up front and not spending that money up front, I could easily see how I would make that money back eventually and still hold the control. So giving up, how much do you want to give up in terms of control to actually possibly getting that money back? If you put up a couple $1,000s up front to publish a book, and then because you have all of that control with marketing and ads and anything like that, you will probably make that money back within a year or so, a couple of years, and then you can make more off of that. With people who do get advances, some people never see that money ever, just depending on how much the advance was. So definitely an option when it comes to expenses. It can be very overwhelming. I'm in that point now where I'm very overwhelmed with the upfront costs, but I know that once I make that money back, every profit I make back is all that. It's all going straight to me and not to anyone else, in terms of a percentage going back to a publisher.
Yeah, I don't think people understand how the difference in the percentages. So I can't speak to a traditional author, but I believe that it's a low percentage of the book sale that you get, versus in like an ebook, as an indie publisher, you get like 70% of the profit. So if your ebook is $10, you're going to get like 7 of that in your pocket. So, and I think it was like 35%. It was 30 to 40% when I was self-publishing. I don't know what it is now for the paperbacks, depending on what channel you use, like who's buying it. But that percentage is so small in traditional publishing that it takes twice as many copies sold to get a good profit if you put money up front. Like if you had someone edit it before you even sent it off to traditional publishers or something like that. Whereas I did no marketing hardly at all. I put it for sale a couple of times, but I, even with how much I spent on my cover designer, made my money back without even trying that hard because of the percentage I was selling. So I think that is something to consider, that unless you really don't try at all, like you're gonna probably make your money back on what you put in. If you put in a tiny bit of effort, you will.
Yeah, you have to sell more with a trad contract because the percentages are so low. And at least with physical copies, I mean, it's usually under 10% that you make. Ebooks is where it's at when it comes to a lot of that, because you make such a large percentage because you don't have any printing costs, like even for the print on demand companies. So in trad contracts, you will normally see like a higher percentage. It's not that high, but you will definitely have to sell less to get to that break-even point, and then it's just all profit for you.
As long as you don't buy 500 copies.
Yeah, but think about the difference between selling 100 books at 9% versus selling 100 books at 35%. Like you're going to make your money back so much faster if you put the effort in.
Well, this was a long one, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I think there's a ton of advice that we have, and we would love to continue this conversation down below in the comments. If you want to talk about your experience self-publishing, or if you're going into self-publishing, or even just considering it, we'd love to chat with you. As we said, we want to build up this community, especially when it comes to independent publishing and publishing all around. So that's the question of the day. So if you have experience with self-publishing or even thinking about it, chat with us in the comments, or anything that we said that you agree with or didn't know before. We would love to chat with you. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
There was something I was gonna say, but I just forgot. Oh my God.